Welcome to Athletes to Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, and we've set out to create a platform to help people to network and connect using common bonds. And whether you're an alumni from a college, whether you're a sorority, a fraternity, business alumni associations, and athletes, we're here to create value for that. And we've created this shows because there's a big issue today with athlete transition, and we really want to teach and inspire athletes that there is life after sports. And we're really excited today to have on Jen Garrett. And Jen is an author. She is the creator of the Move the Ball movement, and she's a business branding expert. And we're really excited to have Jen on the show today. Jen, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rob, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you.
You're welcome. It's, and I say I'm inspired. I listen to Jen has a great podcast. I definitely think, and we'll talk about later how you get there, but she has a lot of NFL players on there, and they talk a lot about different things going on in the business world. So it is exciting. And again, Jen will give a better description of that later on when I let her do her true commercial. That was the 30,000 foot view. So what I want to talk about first is tell me about growing up playing sports.
Yes. I mean, I've played sports my entire life. I think there's a lot of things that playing sports can really teach you to be successful in whatever it is that you're doing in life. People talk all the time about how sports are parallel to life. And so, I mean, I think for me, it's really the competitive aspect. I mean, people always talk about the hard work and the discipline and all those things, but the competitive nature, I think, is something that I really took away from it because, I mean, in business, I mean, it is a competition, right? Whether you're a business owner or you're looking to advance your career, you are competing with other people out there playing that same game. And so being someone that played sports at a young age, that really taught me the essence of competition and how to do it right and fairly and ethically and all that stuff. But also, just how that is an important component to being successful as you continue through sports as well as through life.
That's great. Did you ever want to be a professional athlete?
I did. I am very small. And so, I mean, for the sports that you don't necessarily need height, those are not the ones that I was really as excited about. And so I love basketball. I love football. Football a little bit harder for a woman, although they do have women playing professional football, not an NFL level, obviously. But yeah, so because of my physical limitations, I just never really thought that was something I would do, but it was something I always would have loved to have done. Yeah,
I think I always ask that question. A lot of talking to some of these athletes, and I say, I would have loved to have been a professional baseball player. However, unfortunately, I have the talent, so now I'm doing stuff like this. So, all right. So you talked about sports and all that. So let's kind of fast forward to college, and we talked a little bit before about getting involved in intramural sports. So I want to hear more about that and maybe some of your experiences with that, as well as just with other athletes at your school.
Yeah, so I went to Long Beach State, Cal State Long Beach for undergrad. As you know, I've been to many schools, but that was where it started in terms of college education. And I've always been someone that was interested in sports. Something about me is that I had, and I think you know this, Rob, I had my first child when I was 17, turning 18. I was already out of high school because I graduated when I was 16, but being a single parent, trying to raise a child, trying to play competitive sports as a student athlete, I thought about walking on to the basketball team, but just trying to navigate the demands of school and parenthood, I was like, probably couldn't do that. So I decided to play intramural sports instead. I was the only woman that played in the men's league. And so, I mean, it was a great way to connect with other athletes who, again, had that competitive mentality and that drive. And that's something that I love with what I do today, which we'll talk about later, is you just get to interact around people that are always looking at how can they improve? They're never satisfied. It's push, push, push. How can I continue to level up and continue to excel?
That's great. And, being, involved, and I'm sure you were involved, had friends and, athletes that might've been, playing the different sports like you're talking about. What kinds of things did you see at Long Beach State, or maybe not even then, but maybe now just in your journey and the different folks that you deal with, the athletes? Was there, I guess, from their perspective, the school, were they helping the athletes to kind of see the big picture? Was it all about the sport itself, or did they kind of look at like, hey, let's help these athletes, whatever the sport might be, in their future, because, most of them aren't going to be, going past that collegiate level?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a whole, most of the athletic programs are really focused on, you're playing sports today, but it's making sure that we're setting you up for success beyond and, talking about life skills and business and things. I think more schools, and it's been a little bit of time since I've been at Long Beach State, so I'm not sure what they're doing today, but I think just more schools are really having an increased emphasis and focus on that life beyond sports aspect of curriculum and training and programs that they provide to their student athletes.
That's great. I mean, and one of the things we're trying to do at Alumni Direct, and might have talked about this offline, I've talked to some other people, is we're looking to work with schools and go in to the athletic department with resources that have kind of gone through the athlete transition and different types of business consultants like yourself, and kind of rolling up the sleeves and talking to them about how do we help athletes, and not only the transition afterwards, but whether it's from a mental health standpoint or even just from a standpoint of the entrepreneurship, kind of putting together a curriculum that would help them out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's something that most schools recognize that, hey, there's a need to do, and have allocated a budget to have programs that are really designed to set up their student athletes for success beyond whatever sport they're playing.
How much did you at Long Beach State, or just again in other schools that you're familiar with? How much involvement have you seen from alumni athletes, like coming back and kind of mentoring or helping the current students?
Yeah, I don't, it's been a little while, like I said, since I've been in touch with Long Beach State, so I can't speak to them, but I think like for the bigger D1 programs, not that Long Beach is one of those, you see a number of athletes that will come back because they want to make an impact and kind of share what they've learned on their journey. Some schools are a little bit more proactive in bringing their alumni back than others, but I mean, I think generally you see that there's a lot of schools that are really trying to reach into that alumni population, or the alumni themselves want to reach back and try to make an impact and share their experiences with the younger generation of athletes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've kind of seen both sides of that. I mean, some people, one former NFL player, he was actually wanting to go back to school, and it was almost not that he was shunned, but they just kind of, turn the other way. And you would think that that's something that schools will really embrace. However, to your point, I think even now more so, they're realizing that and embracing the athletes. I mean, I know there was one school that I was talking to, and they've actually hired a kind of an engagement director to work with, bringing alumni together with the athletes. So I think they're kind of seeing that as something they should start doing.
And some schools, like, for example, I went to Alabama as well, and Alabama has a student athlete alumni association, and so they are really focused on events geared towards student athletes and mixing those student athletes with their alumni athlete population.
No, that's great. I mean, and a lot of what I think some of these schools, they don't have the bandwidth. I mean, we've talked to a lot of different types of alumni relations departments, and I think a lot of times you'll see kind of the fundraising versus the friend raising. And that's something, we're trying to do with our platform, is to create more of that friend raising, have people come out on the platform and, work together, network together. One of the big topics today is NIL, the name, image, likeness. And I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that's something you're involved with. Share with me what you think, in both good and bad of it.
Yeah, I mean, NIL is definitely a hot topic. It's still fairly new. It's been just over a year ago that the NCAA allowed players to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness. And so, I mean, I know there's still a lot of confusion around it and what's allowable and what regulations or what rules and what controls schools can put in place for their athletes. But I mean, I think in general, it's a great way. I think the idea of it is a great way for student athletes to be thinking about, hey, I have a brand, right? And I can use that brand to my advantage, and I can use that brand to monetize in terms of NIL, right? But I think outside of that, it's also about how can I use my brand to expand my network and develop relationships with people that are in the fields of interest that I want to go into in terms of where my career is beyond my sport, beyond college, that kind of a thing. That's not tied to NIL, but I like to educate people, like, think about it that way. You have a brand, right? Your name, your image, your likeness. How can you leverage that for your future success? With regards to NIL specifically, depending on the athlete, you'll hear some people talk about how it's great because athletes get to be compensated, right? But then you'll also hear people talk about, well, there's only a handful of people that are really getting compensated, and it's usually the bigger name people that are getting anything of substance or of significance. And so some people are against it because they think it creates a team divide, because there might be players that aren't getting those deals, sure, and there might be some jealousy, going on there. And so that can affect the team dynamic. So that can be a negative. I think the other thing too, that players need to be aware of when it comes to NIL is you need to consider the bigger picture. Like when you sign up for a deal, make sure you're reading the terms of that agreement too, or asking your parents or somebody, that has some business savvy to make sure you're not signing yourself up for something that can restrict you later on. As an example, you hear about like kids that are getting car deals, right? And so they may be doing something with a local dealership. Well, what they may not realize is that let's say there's someone that's going to go pro and there might be a potential bigger deal out there. Well, if they sign up to this deal, they may be restricting their ability to do something on a larger scale. So again, it's just, reading through that. Is it exciting to, have a possibility of compensation, whether it's a car or free food or money or whatever? Yes, but you have to understand, what are you signing yourself up to? What are your obligations and commitments for that as well? And so I know we're getting a little bit in the weeds there, but I think it's just an important thing for people to be aware of, because it's not just about, ooh, I can get some money. Just make sure you know what you're signing up for as well.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And I think people need to look at that. I mean, I guess the other side of it too is I was talking to one former NFL player, and he was like, yeah, it'd be great. I would have loved to, been paid when I was an athlete in college. But, his concern was just kind of like that, you hear a lot of the financial literacy, and it's not just athletes. I mean, it could be anybody. I mean, anybody young, if you give they get that much of a windfall of money or just any money, they just don't know, okay, well, hey, guess what? You got to pay taxes and you got to do other things with it. So I think it's, a lot of people have talked about. I think that there needs to certainly be education around it. I
think that because NIL is here now, I think more programs are also incorporating financial literacy into their portfolio of resources for their student athletes, so they can be aware of how to better manage these finances now that there's these opportunities.
Right. It's interesting when you look at and this, getting into once they have, finished their sport. And, I was talking to one coach, and he's just like, a lot of these athletes, I mean, unfortunately, whether it's injury or they're done, like, just they don't make it to the professional level. I mean, they're in their early 20s or and all of a sudden they've got 30, 40, 50, 60 years of life still ahead of them. And they just, whatever they grew up playing sports, let's say, and regardless of what their background is and where they came from, their whole effort when practicing, playing and all that, it's like, oh, now what do they do? So what kinds of things, what kinds of advice would you give to these young athletes? Okay, now your career's over, what should they do next in their journey?
For sure. And I mean, this is a common topic that people ask me about, because for student athletes, you're on the schedule, your identity is really wrapped around the sport that you've been playing, and your schedule and everything is around that. And so one of the things that I tell people to do is really, I mean, at some point it's going to come to an end, whether it's when you want it to, or an injury, to your point, it's going to end. So you really need to be thinking about, what do I want to do besides the sport? At some point, I'm an athlete that plays a sport, but this is not my identity. It's not who I am, right? I'm more than an athlete. So what is that thing that I want to be more? Where do I want to go in terms of a future career? And really start building your network now. And I mean, I think a platform like what you have, being able to reach out to alumni and other people and create relationships. I mean, we all know that your network is your net worth, right? Is what they say, or vice versa. And so by building that while you're a student athlete, that's just setting you up ahead of those that are not doing that. We talked about competition earlier. This is one way that you can get ahead of the other people that are out there trying to build their career in the same field that you may be looking to get into. And the fact that you are a student athlete, there's a lot of people that will connect with you because of your brand as a student athlete. So leverage that to build your network and figure out, where do I want to go? Based on that, who are the people that I want to target? And that, social media is great. We live in an era where you can literally connect with anybody, or try to, whether or not they connect with you, TBD, right? But you have the ability to try to reach anybody out there. And so leverage technology to your advantage.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you brought up a point, like I was talking to one agent, and he was saying that the biggest issue that some of these athletes don't realize is the best time to network and connect is when they are playing.
Yes.
And a lot of times they don't do that. And so they get done and like, okay, well, I was a star athlete and I'm going to get hired and make all this money. And they're like, no, that's where you got to make the connections. And I was talking to one guy, and I was talking about Alumni Direct and what we're trying to do. And within our site, we have what's called Athletes Corner. And the idea there is to give athletes an opportunity to promote themselves. But one thing in this community center for the school itself is, imagine like Long Beach State, is that you're in this community center as an athlete, and there's all types of alumni in there. And now it's time that your career's over, and you're looking for something. What a better place to go to possibly get a job or get that mentorship from other fellow alumni. So when I mentioned this to one athlete, he's like, man, he goes, Rob, that would have changed the trajectory of my life. He said, it wasn't around for him. And so he was kind of like went into his whole thing. And, unfortunately, like a little bit of a tailspin, he's gotten his, self out of it and really been successul. But that's what we're trying to do.
Oh, and I think it's great. And if I can share two quick stories. I mean,
Sure.
For me, I didn't know anybody in sports when I was growing up. And so I never thought that I would be doing work with professional athletes because I didn't know anybody. Well, social media has changed it. Like I said, I mean, I built my network by just connecting with people on various different platforms. So, I mean, that has changed my life. And, kind of where I'm going is just the ability to connect with people that I never 20 years ago would have had the ability to connect with. The other part, I just wanted to illustrate an example of how the power of social media. So you mentioned my podcast. We'll talk about that more later. But one day I was at my mom's house really recently, and she was watching an episode of Undercover Boss, and they were featuring this woman, and she had lost her mother, and she was talking about that. And my ears perked up because I lost my dad very unexpectedly. And so I connected with what she had to say. And I thought, you know what? I want to see if she wants to come on my podcast. So I went to LinkedIn. She wasn't there, but I found someone that worked for her company, reached out to them, said, hey, this is who I am. I have a podcast. I'd love to have Gina on my show. Could you tell me who the right point of contact would be to explore that? She found that person's info. She passed on my info. They reached out to me before I was able to reach out to her. And within the period of a week from the time I watched that show, we had recorded the episode.
Wow, that's great.
So, I mean, I'm not just saying just you, I mean,
Yeah.
It works. It's definitely a great tool. So leverage it to your advantage to build your network and create relationships and explore opportunities.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Like I was talking earlier to someone who's kind of one of the inspirations of me getting started on this whole thing with the athletes, entrepreneurs. And it's just amazing the people you meet. Like one thing I met I met a guy who's an insurance agent. So a friend of mine hooks me up with this insurance agent. I need insurance. He then introduces me to this another guy who was a motivational speaker, and he's a publishing company and all that. He then introduces me to another guy who's a coach, and that coach then was the one who basically introduced me to you and also to Caston, who's been our show as well. And then through that, I've met just tons of other people. So you're right. It's all networking and connecting, and that one person turns another person turns another person.
And I guess the other thing about networking, where so many people get this wrong, is they focus on, I want to network with somebody because of what they can do for me. And that's not what networking is about. It's about developing quality relationships that are mutually beneficial. And if there's an opportunity to help one another, great. But it's not, I'm going to connect with them because I want them to do something for me today. That's bad networking. Don't do that.
That's a great lesson, because I talk about that all the time. The first thing I do is, how can I help you? And I mean, that's the fabric, and that's what we stand for as a company. It's all about helping others. Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, you want it to be mutual, but my first reaction, how do I help you? And then hopefully it right. kind of reciprocates back. And if it doesn't, at some point, you kind of, those are people that you don't want to deal with. They're all about like, help me.
Right. And I guess, even when you build relationships, if that relationship never helps you in a way, like you've made a great connection, you've had a great relationship, friendship, like it's not always about, well, eventually I want them to do something for me. Right. So it's just about connecting with good people. And if there's a time and a place and an opportunity to help each other, then that just happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. So, all right. So now we're going to fast forward, and we're going to talk about move the ball movement. And I said it right. It's a little bit of tongue twister, everybody out there. Move the ball movement.
Yes.
But tell us about that. I guess, that's all going to lead to talking about your podcast, talking about your company, your books and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so the Move the Ball movement started with a book called Move the Ball, which was a book about American football and how you take principles and lessons, specific football lessons, and apply them off the field to be successful, not only in business, but in your career or whatever it is you're trying to do in life. The movement evolved from, or that book evolved into a movement where the Move the Ball brand really represents forward motion. It's not as much about football as it's about just picture any ball or any object and moving that thing forward every single day. And it doesn't matter how fast you go or how slow, you just got to keep it moving. And so that's really the ideology behind the movement. We have the podcast called the Move the Ball Podcast, where, like you mentioned earlier, have a lot of NFL guys, also some successful entrepreneurs. I've had 2 CEOs from Undercover Boss on the show, as well as other Fortune 500 executives, senior execs. But it's, again, talking about how they use the competitive athlete mentality to be successful in their journey and things that they would pass on to others in managing business, managing their careers, leveraging their brands.
Okay, that's great. And how long did it take a while to write a book? I mean, everybody talks about you got to write a book. At some point, maybe I will. I know fortunately in my back pocket, my son is a writer and an editor. So I got there's one book that I was asked to do a chapter in the book. So I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit and just talk it through with my son and have him write the chapter for me. But I'll still be in a book for the first time, which would be kind of cool.
There you go. You can have a ghost writer. It's okay. Nothing wrong with ghosts. We need those people too. But it took me about a year to write the first book. I also have been to write Move the Ball. I also was a contributing author in a book that came out earlier this year. So writing one chapter is a lot different than writing a full book. Sure. It's a lot more work. I just finished another book, which I don't have the title for yet, but it's going to come out in the fall. And so I'm really excited about that. That also took me about a year to write. So I think that's kind of like my baseline is a year, just and that wasn't like writing every day, but it just kind of worked out. I mean, I'll go in these phases where I'll like knock out chapter after chapter, and then it's kind of a lull for a little bit, just because there's other things going on in life. And that's the thing about life. Like, I mean, things happen. I think the other thing for anyone that's looking to write a book is you can set a deadline to get it done. If you don't hit that deadline, there's no big deal. Like, don't stress yourself out trying to meet that artificial deadline. Like, my goal was to have this book done by December of 2021. Didn't get it done because I had other priorities that I just had to handle. It's okay. Just shift things to the right sometimes. There's no shame in that. You just got to do what works for you and your schedule.
Absolutely. So is it a sequel or just a whole new?
It is a complement to Move the Ball. On my podcast, every episode, as you know, I say, until next time, make sure you suit up, you show up, and you move the ball. This book is all about how to show up, suit up, and show up to life so that you can go after what you want and live the life that you want. So the book is structured in 3 parts. There's a suit up section, a show up section, and a move the ball. And the move the ball is different than the original book. So new material there as well. But that's the structure of this next one that I have yet to have a title for.
Well, we definitely have to read it. I will say I do need to read the book, Move the Ball. Is there an audio version or you just have to?
There is, narrated by me. And so, it's on Audible, and then you can get it on Apple iTunes as well.
Awesome. I definitely will get it on Audible because it's so hard now. Like I do a lot of walking and running and stuff. So it's nice to be able to like listen to it while you're doing it. I mean, that's when I'm listening to your podcast. So
it's definitely easier to multitask. Like I personally like to read physical books, but it's harder to do because you have to carve out time to just read. You can't be at the gym or going for a walk or doing something else. Yeah,
it's harder to multitask. So tell people how they can find you.
Yeah, so you can, if you just Google the hashtag Move the Ball, that should pop up with all kinds of things. But I have a website. It's getinsidethehuddle.com. You can also go to movetheballpodcast.com and check out any of the podcasts. And the podcast is on all the major platforms as well. And then I also, because branding is a part of business, I have a merchandise line. You can go to wemovetheball.com. So you can check out all the stuff that's tied to the movement, and my contact info is on all of those different sites as well.
That's great. And we'll put it in the show notes as well. And you can find us at alumnidirect.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, and go to YouTube and watch this show and other shows. Again, at Alumni Direct, we're continuing to look for ways to provide value to alumni, regardless of what type of alumni. And this has been a great show. We really appreciate all your time, Jen, and we'll look forward to future shows.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.